Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm joined by my colleagues at another program here at the Aspen Institute, the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development. And you'll be hearing much more from them and the parents they have worked with over the last 2 years than from me. We have extended this invitation to join this webinar to our national network. So many of you are familiar with Ascend and our two-generational work, but I'm going to kick us off with a short overview of our work and then turn it over to my colleagues Grace and Melissa at the National Commission, who will guide you through this webinar along with their fantastic parents. Just as a note, Ascend has not been directly involved in the development of this work, nor does it have an explicit two-gen focus like Ascend does. But as a colleague program at the Aspen Institute, we thought it would be tremendously helpful and also useful to give our own network an opportunity to learn about this commission and their upcoming findings. Before we dive in, we have a couple of quick housekeeping notes. The first is that the webinar will run for approximately 1 hour. We are also recording the webinar so that those of you who need to leave early or you want to share it with colleagues can do so once we post it to our website. Please note that as participants, you are muted, and if you wish to ask a question, you just use the raise your hand icon on your screen. If you wish to be audible for your question, you must log in using your audio PIN number. Otherwise, you can submit a question through the chat box on the screen, and we'll review it and share it throughout the course of the webinar. So you can either use the raise your hand icon or the chat box. So many of you are familiar with Ascend, but as I noted, we were created as a policy program of the Aspen Institute 8 years ago by our executive director, Ann Mosley. And our vision is of an America in which a legacy of educational success, health and well-being, and economic security passes from one generation to the next. At the heart of our work is the two-generation approach. We also take a racial equity and a gender lens to all of our work. Our mission is to be the national hub for breakthrough ideas and collaborations that move children and their families, or the adults in their lives, toward educational success, economic well-being, and health and well-being. We do this in 3 main ways. We have a national network and a national fellowship program. Our national network includes 277 organizations in nearly all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Guam, and Puerto Rico, that are exploring, incubating, or implementing two-gen approaches. We also have a national fellowship program, and these are leaders across the country who are actively implementing two-generation approaches across a range of sectors. Our second strategy is around state policy. So we work with 12 to 14 states, primarily through their governor's offices and human services departments, to help them better align systems for families in a two-generational way. And then our third strategy is engaging the voices of families to inform everything that we do. Best practices, policy ideas, systems change, technical assistance. We have a history of commissioning bipartisan focus groups and polling, and we work with a group of parent ambassadors. And I think that's part of what we're so excited about with regards to the Commission's work, because as you will hear, many of their findings and ideas have been directly informed by the experiences of parents. I think most of you are familiar with the two-generation approach, but just briefly, there are 5 key components to this work. Early childhood is at the heart of it, as well as post-secondary education and workforce pathways. We know the high ROI in early childhood is powerful, but we also know that the best predictor of a family's economic success is that parent's educational attainment. Our third component is around economic assets. So these are supports that help all families thrive, and in particular families with low incomes, like the Earned Income Tax Credit and child savings accounts. We also look at health and well-being, and that will be a focus of today's conversation. So access to physical, emotional, and mental health services. And then finally, our 5th component is social capital. We often refer to this as the secret sauce of two-generation approaches. And these are the web of relationships and access to networks and institutions that help people thrive. So that's a snapshot of Ascend and the two-generation approach. Again, we're delighted to make this information from the Commission available to our network. We would also encourage our partners and the families they work with to share feedback with us after the webinar on what was useful and any other information they'd like. But with that, I will turn it over to our colleagues, Grace and Melissa.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I'm Melissa Meller, Assistant Director of Communications for the National Commission. And I want to begin by saying that we think there's real synergy between Ascend's work and the work of the Commission. We truly appreciate Ascend's focus on a two-generation approach to the economic, educational, health, and well-being of families. And as a commission, we've been very diligent about listening to and learning from youth, as well as their parents, caregivers, and families, as we think through ways to reimagine learning for the nation's young people. I'm going to begin with just a very brief overview of the commission and our parent advisory panel in particular, before turning the floor over to my colleague Grace Fisher and today's parent panelists. The commission launched about 2 years ago with the goal of engaging and energizing communities to support a more comprehensive approach to education that builds students' social, emotional, and academic skills. And we're at a really unique moment in time with regards to this work. First, there's converging demand. Parents and educators have long recognized that there are social, emotional, and academic dimensions to learning. Put simply, they know that their children and that students will learn more when their needs as whole people are being met. And employers and business leaders are increasingly valuing skills such as the ability to problem solve and to work on teams. And they're asking K-12 education to pay more attention to developing these skills in their students. And students themselves have been calling for this more comprehensive approach to education. In fact, next week, a new survey of high school youth called Respected will be released, and it very much underscores the demand among young people for this more comprehensive approach to learning and education. Second, in addition to this converging demand for this approach, there's a growing evidence base across multiple areas, from developmental and learning science to brain science. And this growing evidence base confirms the multidimensional nature of learning. In short, that we learn in a social context and that learning cannot happen in the absence of emotion. And then third, our current policy climate, which has returned education decision-making to states and local communities, has opened the door for communities to reimagine learning for their students. So the Commission has spent the past 2 years listening and learning to the work of communities that have been engaged in these efforts. We've listened and learned, listened to and learned from researchers that are studying it, and families and students that have both been a part of it or want to see more of it. And it's drawing from all that it's learned to develop recommendations in research, practice, and policy that will be released in January of 2019 to help even more communities support the whole learner. So with that backdrop, I want to quickly describe who's part of the National Commission's effort. The Commission itself is composed of just over 20 leaders from different fields, including education, research, business, and the military. And we have a number of advisory groups that are part of the Commission. This includes a Council of Scientists, a Council of Educators, a Youth Commission, our Parent Advisory Panel, and a Partners Collaborative. So you'll be hearing today from 3 members of our Parent Advisory Panel. And this group has been a crucial part of the Commission's work. They've provided an important parent and family perspective on how they think about learning and how they want their schools and communities to support their children's growth and development. The Parent Advisory Panel created a family call to action a few months ago, and it illuminates the parent perspective on social, emotional, and academic development, and it's informed the National Commission's final recommendations. And when the parent panelists put this document together, they also envisioned that the call would help inspire other parents across the country, and it provides them with ideas for how they can work with their schools to enhance their children's learning, really giving them things to look for and to ask about when they are engaged in conversation with educators and others in their communities. So one final point before I turn the floor over to our panelists. Over the course of the last 2 years, the Commission has developed an array of resources, and this includes videos and case studies that show how to support the whole learner at the school, classroom, and community levels. We've also developed videos and research briefs that explain the science behind this approach to learning. We have our family call to action, a corresponding youth call to action, as well as reports from our councils of educators and scientists. And then we also have a communications playbook but with resources that are meant to help educators and families have conversations about this topic. So we invite you to check out all of these resources and to use them as you see fit, and they're all available at the 2 links provided on the PowerPoint slide. And so without any further delay, I'd like to introduce my colleague Grace Fisher, who will moderate a conversation with our parent panelists.
Hi, everyone, and thank you again for joining us today. I'm excited to introduce the 3 members of our parent advisory panel. The first is Diana Lamonti, who is a nonprofit professional, writer, and activist from New York. We also will be joined by Diana Pritchard, who is a freelance journalist and first-generation female farmer from Fowler, Michigan, and Van Overton, who is the executive director of Spread Love ABQ from Albuquerque, New Mexico. So we're going to begin by asking our panelists a few questions to tell us more about the call to action and what it means to them, but we'll also open up the second half of the webinar to answer questions from you all, from the audience. So please feel free to type questions as you think of them, and we'll plan to address them after we've sort of talked to our panelists a little bit. So I'd like to get started with our first question. Can you outline the main points of the family call to action and the process used to create it? And Diana Pritchard, could you start us off?
Sure, thanks, Grace. I was honored to have the opportunity to act kind of as the lead author on the report along with Van Overton. And I think the thing that came together best about the report is that even though I acted as the author, it was really this huge effort coming together from 15 different panelists that were and advisors from around the country who are racially diverse, religiously diverse, politically diverse, geographically diverse. So the key part of it was really the group that Aspen put together and the process for getting it all together and the collaboration that came out of that group of 15 parents. We had many phone calls. What we did, we had one phone call where we started off where we just kind of started to brainstorm what it meant to us to have social and emotional learning in the classroom, and everyone had some input on that. We went back, made a first draft, and then from there we just got back on the phone each month and talked about, we provided that draft back to all of the advisors, and then we talked about how can we refine this, what hits, what misses, and in the end what we came out with were 5 buckets, as we called them, of points that we really thought where our communities and our schools and our parents needed to focus on in order to bring social and emotional learning to classrooms all across the country, and for it to really work in all of our different communities from where we were from and communities like ours. Those 5 buckets, what we ended up with were that we needed schools to teach the whole student. It was very important to all of the parents on the panel that when our kids go to school, they are known and they are acknowledged as unique individuals in that capacity, and that they're being interacted with by the adults, whether it be teachers, principals, bus drivers, everybody in the educational system, that they're being interacted with as unique individuals throughout their entire school day. So we wanted that whole student approach to learning. The second bucket is that we really wanted parents to be partners. I think many of us felt that sometimes, despite our best efforts and despite the best efforts of many of the educators we've worked with, there's kind of a siloed approach to education right now, and parents don't always feel that they're stakeholders in the classroom. So we really tried to emphasize in our second bucket in the report that parents need to be partners in education. They need to have input and give and take, and part of that is us stepping up to the plate, of course, and going into the school and making ourselves partners, but also that we wanted the schools to reach out and try to make that happen too, through communication and different initiatives to get more parents involved. The third bucket we came up with were that we wanted educators to be supported. As much as we saw that it was hard for us to go in and be partners sometimes, we also see that our teachers aren't getting the support they need. And sometimes that's resources, and sometimes that's just culture, or just the way we're looking at one another, or the way that the day is structured or scheduled, or there are a lot of different approaches to that. But when it came down to it, we really need all of the educators. And for us, we looked at again, teachers, principals, bus drivers, everybody throughout the educational system as an educator, as an adult who's interacting with the children, and everyone there needed to be supported. So we are really asking schools to step up to the plate there and give teachers and other educators the support they need in order to be able to implement SEL effectively throughout their day. Fourth, of course, then we go into it, SEL has to be culture. As we talked throughout our phone calls, it was very clear that nobody wanted this to just be another program. I think as we were going through school when we were younger, and a couple of generations, depending on how old the parents were, we saw a lot of things that have come through schools that end up being programmatic, and so it doesn't really necessarily trickle down to the kids in the way that we were hoping. And so we tried to emphasize in the report, the call to action, that we do not want SEL to be another one of those programs that's just surface deep. We want it to be cultural, so that every step in a child's day as they go through the school day, SEL is really something that they're getting from every single angle. So it's not just teaching them to be responsible and to be empathetic, it's demonstrating for them that I'm also, as an adult, responsible, and I'm also, as an adult, empathetic. And then finally, our fifth bucket, we wanted to have a whole community approach. I think we're seeing more and more, and other panelists also in their communities are seeing more and more that education is not just during the school day. So it's not just, when you put your child on the bus and when you get them back off the bus at the end of the day, or walk to school, or however it is they get there. It's not just those hours between 8 and 3 or 9 and 4 or what have you. It's also when they're going out and they're interacting with other community organizations, or when they're on the sports field or in band, any of their extracurriculars afterwards, and also just with their interactions with businesses in the community. So we're also asking in the call to action that schools and community leaders both try to be cognizant of the fact that learning happens all the time. And so if they can go out and make partnerships that can help kids have social and emotional learning infused throughout their whole day rather than just the school day, we thought that it would be more effective implementation in these communities who undertake this.
Great. Thank you so much, Diana. Now we're going to jump to our second question, actually. As parents, why do you want a more comprehensive approach to learning and development? So we'd love to hear really from all three of our parents. And Van, actually, would you like to start us off?
I would love to. Thank you. As a parent, I think we all know how different all of our children are. And that they all come to school every day with a number of things that are affecting them outside the school's walls that they have to deal with. I have two very different children with two very different needs. Both of my children are gifted and very empathetic, caring people who are affected by real world stuff very deeply. And they both have to deal with varying degrees of stress and everything else. So with a whole child approach, they start to develop ways in which to deal with these issues, not just at school, but outside of school as well. And that helps them work through whatever it is they might be dealing with. I think that's one of the key points for me. What about you, Diana or Diana?
Diana L., would you like to go next since we haven't heard from you yet?
Sure. Hi. So I think that the reason we want a comprehensive approach to learning and development is because, as Van said, our children are complex. They're not all the same, not even in the household, as Van mentioned. They're really little people, and a lot of times we forget that, and we ask them sit and listen and be quiet and not wiggle in their seats. Like there's just a lot of things that they're dealing with throughout the day. And we can't ask them to check their emotions and leave their issues at the door. So teaching the whole child will help them learn better academically. And really when those social emotional skills are nurtured, they feel confident to learn. These skills are really skills that they're going to need their whole lives. Really, we need to regulate our own emotions as adults and to live and work well with others. So the earlier we start, the better. It's the basis of communication and interaction with others, from the moment we are little till the moment we stop being here. So.
Thank you. And Diana, please, do you want to finish up?
Absolutely, thank you. I agree with Van and Diana. I think I see this really as seed social, emotional, and academic development as a whole being in the social and emotional aspects of that education, specifically as a foundation that lives are built on. And so each individual child is going to have a very different life, and they come from different backgrounds, and they have different hopes and dreams for their future. But the thing that connects all of them is that without this foundation, they can't meet their potential. And I think when they can't meet their potential, then the whole community loses out, their families lose out, organizations and businesses lose out. And so I really see it as a foundation for kids to go on to have happy lives and successful lives. And we can define success in many different ways, but all of it relies on being able to navigate everything from your daily chores that you go about to life's big events, interacting with other people, managing time, prioritizing things. So for me, I just see it as a foundation, and I think if we can give all kids that foundation, then we'll all be better off in the future for that.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And so now we've heard a little bit about what was in the call to action and why this approach to learning is important to you. But we want to hear from each of you. Really, if you had to pick one message from this document, what would you want people to take away? And Diana, maybe you could start us off this time.
Sure. So I think that, as I touched on briefly, these are skills that we will always need, and we should develop them early on and continue cultivating them from, pre-K and kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. As we're developing and cultivating these skills, we obviously should do it in a developmentally appropriate way. And we need these skills to have happy adults who are able to work well with others.
Great. And Dan, would you like?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think the biggest thing is the need to bring every part of our community together behind this, realizing that every single person in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our cities are a part of this educational plan or a part of this social emotional implementation. Everyone from the person who is an empty nester down the street to the local barber, to the local grocer, to the paper boy, that everybody plays an important role in the developing of our community's children. I think that's the biggest takeaway from, or the one thing that I would pick is the need to focus on creating truly meaningful partnerships with communities and organizations.
Great, thank you. And Diana P., would you like to go ahead?
Absolutely. I agree with Van. The partnership and the fact that each individual contributes so much to their community is huge. And for me, that boils down to that real world readiness, that foundation, and how that in turn turns into economic development for local communities. I think whether we like it or not, as humans, one of our tendencies, anytime we're running anything from a school to a business, is to say, you know, what's in it for us? Why? What's the why? Why do we do it? What's the return on investment? And for social and emotional learning to include that right alongside academics for those local communities, the return on investment, the obvious return that we'll be able to measure is that economic development. As we move forward, I think there are more and more jobs. I certainly see it out here in rural America and in middle America where we're at, more and more jobs that require kids and employees, kids now, future employees, hopefully not too many kids are out there in jobs, to have the skills to work on their own and to direct their day and to, in every level of every type of business, to really be able to work very closely with other people to solve problems and to make progress at each level of that business. And so I think communities need kids to have social and emotional learning and right alongside their academics. And for me, that biggest takeaway for schools and communities as they go into this and decide whether or not to implement it is to know that in the future, their economic development is really going to rely on it.
And real quick, to piggyback off that a little bit, realizing that how important that it's also important for the community of this social, emotional, and academic development, you know, is going to increase average wages and just produce better employees just all around.
Absolutely, I totally agree, and I think your point about everybody being a contributor is so important to that, because as we increase wages, I think it will also come not only because of the social and emotional aspect, allowing people to do a better job, that's super important, and I agree will happen, but it's also because when you have social and emotional intelligence, you also can more easily see how that barber is a contributor. The guy who washes your car is a contributor. You start to really value everyone in your community more.
Thank you. And on that note, we're actually wondering, really, are you seeing examples of this approach to learning in your communities and in your schools? So we'd love to hear, I guess, from Diana L., if you're ready to start us off.
Sure. I'm really happy that the schools in my district are paying close attention to social, emotional, and academic development. The teachers in my son's school and other schools in the district, from the information I've gotten from other parents, is that they're doing things like meditation, talking about their feelings, using affirmations to set the day, using differentiated seating in classrooms to help them learn in a way that is comfortable for them. I feel that the students really feel empowered to talk about their feelings. And I know that because my son says to me things like, I'm allowed to feel XYZ, or, you know, that. So they're definitely talking about it.
Great. Thank you. And Van, would you like to go next?
Yeah, you know, I think I want to say slowly. Things are slowly happening the way that I would like to see them happen here. You know, being able to sit in and hear about the things happening in Nashville and visiting Tacoma and seeing how an entire district, an entire school even, comes together and rallies behind this SEL implementation. It just shows me how much work there really is to do here in Albuquerque. You know, we do struggle with being the last on lists when it comes to education, or the first on some lists, but both of those lists tend to be negative lights. You know, number one in poverty. Well, we flipped back and forth with Mississippi on that one, but poverty, education, we're really struggling with a lot of these issues, which means we have a lot of opportunities. And we've been fortunate here in Albuquerque anyways, not so much statewide, but here in Albuquerque, to have a new superintendent who is really jumping on board with the social and emotional learning platform and really pushing things. But I still find myself constantly trying to put myself in front of community members and city council members and Board of Education members to really stress the importance of this, because I don't think it's happening as fast as it really could happen. And that's the thing, is all of these things are very doable. It's just about breaking away from this is the way we've always done things, and but how are we going to get everybody to be on board, and getting people to stop thinking of this as just another PED that we sit through, but like Diana said earlier, a culture that we're trying to create where it's something that we do, it's something that's a part of us inherently, eventually, that it's not going to be a problem. So things aren't happening as fast as I'd like to see them happening, but they are happening. And I think that within the next couple of years here in Albuquerque, we're going to see things start happening in leaps and bounds.
Great. Well, we're excited. Diana P., do you want to finish off this question?
Sure. I think I'm going to end up piggybacking on Van's comments again. We're two great minds think alike, right, Van? Last time, I think a few months ago, when we were at the Accident Institute, I was speaking with Commissioner Tim Shriver, and we were talking about how exciting all this movement is. And he said, it's too bad that it's taken us this long to get to it. And I responded, it's too bad it's also going to take so long to really get it implemented. And he pushed back a little bit, and he was like, no, it's done. Everybody's on board. This is great. And I think that conversation just really highlighted, one, it's really exciting because from the high level, I think it really is, quote unquote, done. People are bought in at the high level. But also that means it has to unfortunately trickle down, and trickling down just takes a really long time. Here in our community, I've seen some movement. Our high school recently introduced what they call a PRIDE program, and PRIDE stands for something I don't know right now off the top of my head. But the gist of the whole program is all social and emotional learning being infused into the culture of the school. And so I see things like that happening, but like Van said, I think it's slow, and unfortunately the nature of these sort of things just does take time.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I should look at too is that, places like Tacoma and Ohio and Tennessee, they didn't do it overnight either. They just jumped on board earlier, so that now we are starting to see models that we can develop our cities after.
That's great. Well, now we'd actually like to see how you've used this call to action in your communities, and really how, also, if you can speak to how the call to action has influenced the commission's work moving forward. And Diana L., would you start us off?
Sure. I shared the call to action with my son's teacher right when it was first released last academic year, I should say. And this fall, I shared it with the principal. And now, as a member of the school leadership team, I'm hoping that we can start a conversation about how we can put school-wide initiatives in place.
Great. And Diana P., do you want to share it for your community?
Sure. I have shared the call to action with our school district and other leaders throughout the community. I work as a freelancer, and one of my contracts comes into contact with a lot of community leaders and organizations who specifically work on economic development. And so I've been talking to a lot of them as well in a more informal way, just throughout our conversations, and kind of just bringing it up here and there wherever it's appropriate, that really starting in the schools is what we're going to have to do. And what we need to do there in the schools is to bring social and emotional development into alongside the academics for our kids. I've shared this call to action with some of them who seemed receptive to it, and have just continued to work on kind of those conversations with those who weren't so receptive. Again, I think this is just something that takes time.
Yeah. Well, thank you again, both of you, for sharing. And Van, do you also want to let us know what's happening in your community?
Yeah, well, it seems sometimes that all I do is share our call to action. I carry them. I carry some in my car. I have maybe anywhere from 4 to 6 coffee meetings a week where I hand out our one pager. Like I said earlier, I talk to everybody. I have coffee meetings with members of our school board, with members at what we call City Center, which is the building where all of Albuquerque Public Schools is housed. So I have coffee meetings with people from City Center, with people from City Hall. I was fortunate enough to be able to share my idea on our local TEDx stage, where this is what I talked about. I talked about how do we come together and support the whole child? How do we need to get to know a child before we can teach a child? My life is dedicated to supporting all the children, both locally and as far as I can reach. And that's really important to me. I reach out and talk to local PTAs. I actually saw one of our flyers on a school that I was visiting for the first time, and I found out that one sheet came from a meeting that I had with our state president, our New Mexico's PTA president. So I'm constantly out there trying to do what I can to be able to support children who, have such amazing things that they have to deal with. Sometimes unbelievable things, everything from, having to be woken up in the middle of the night by a police officer telling them to move their car, or, just not sure if they're going to be able to eat over the weekend because the only meals they really get are at school. So I'm constantly out and dealing with this and really trying to push this so that we can try to start supporting the whole child. As for the second part of it, how has this call to action influence the commission's work as a whole? The recommendations that we made were focused on building partnerships, which are the commission's report is about recommendations, and they're focused on building partnerships, and that directly draws from a lot of our family call to action and explains the importance of involving families and community in our children's learning. The report is also guided by a theme of hope, which echoes the tone of our call to action. And this movement is not about contempt or ridicule towards educators, but suggesting that we're failing our kids, that we just want to implement strategies that are being used in communities all over the place, and we're finding and developing new approaches that are designed and driven by local community. Supporting educators and school staff to do this work and ensuring this work took a whole community approach were important points for us in our call to action. So we're excited to see a lot of what we put into our call to action being shown in the commission's final recommendations.
Thank you, Van. That's great. And we'll now turn to our last question. And again, if you have any questions that have come up, please feel free to continue sort of adding in the chat or thinking through, and you'll have a chance to ask our panelists right after this. So our final question is, how can families and other organizations that support them make this vision of learning a reality? So what can everyone listening really do to support this vision? And so Diana P., would you like to start us off?
Sure, that would be great. I think the really awesome thing about SEL is that when we look at how to implement it and how to make it a reality in our communities, there are probably as many answers to this question as there are communities who are going to try to answer it. It's something that can be tailored to the unique needs of the community that is trying to implement it. And I think that adaptability is really the greatest point for people to get started on it. So you can go to your students, you can go to your parents, to educators and support staff, local leaders, business, government, whoever you want in your community, whoever makes sense in your community to be involved in the implementation can be involved in the implementation. And what you come up with will look like something that's going to benefit your local area and the kids that you're really serving when you're all done. So I think if you just go and bring together that coalition of all the stakeholders and then assess your needs, that's the first step. And then you can set your goals and move on from there. But I really think that adaptability and that ability to make the approach and the implementation unique to the community that you're serving, and just makes this increases the value of SEL 100-fold.
Thank you, Diana. And Diana L., would you like to jump in here?
Sure. So I absolutely believe in that, what was said earlier about really building it from the community out. So not, the New York City school system telling all the schools what to do, but really, as I said, like the school leadership teams and the school administration working with parents to kind of implement that in their own schools. And I think that is going to branch out to other schools. But I really think that what needs to happen is to have education in the community, starting with parents and also including community leaders, kind of echoing what Diana P. said. Not in a, scholarly way where we share articles about why this is good, but really with real examples of what SEL would do into real world. So, kids who have this kind of opportunity to develop their social and emotional skills will grow up to be better workers, better team workers, things like that. So I think that we need to really break it down in ways that make sense in everyday life, not just in a kind of, view from 30,000 miles above.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And Van, do you want to sort of wrap up this question?
For me, I think it's two things. It's the first is listening. Listen to what the teachers want. Listen to what the district wants. Listen to what the administration, the counselors, everybody, and most importantly, the children have these conversations, saying what does supporting you look like? And then secondly, it's about, I think the superintendent of Tacoma, I think, said it best, and it's about not having community members or organizations choose or change anything that they're doing. It's just about getting everybody's boats rowing in the same direction. It's about coming together as a community and finding out, what is our common goal for supporting children? And then everybody working towards that goal. And I think that's how it will start. It's about everybody getting their boats rowing in the same direction.
Well, thank you to all our panelists. And we hope that you check out the Family Call to Action. Again, that's available at as.cn/call to action. And it's also included as a handout that's downloadable from this webinar. We just wanted to also give a brief sort of shout out. Dan mentioned the Commission's final report. In one of the questions, that report will be released this coming January 15 of 2019. And we'll work with the SEN team to make sure that you are able to view the full recommendations there.
We'd love to just give attendees another minute or two in case you come up with any questions for our panelists, but we just wanted to give another thanks to our panelists, and thank you to everyone for tuning in.
This is Sarah with Ascend, and actually we had a question come in from someone who was unable to join the webinar but was really interested in it, and she had specifically asked about how the commission considered the needs of parents of infants and toddlers in these recommendations, and what types of ideas were generated or considerations were made for very, very young children who are not yet in sort of a formal or structured care.
Yeah, so actually we've got one member of our commission team here, Jennifer Brown-Lerner, who's going to jump in right now.
Well, thanks for that great question, and I'm sorry that you couldn't join us, but this has been a really critical and important piece of the Commission's evolved thinking. First and foremost, the Commission has moved away from using exclusively the language of schools to focus more comprehensively on learning settings. And when we do that, we first and foremost put families as the most critical learning setting for each and every young person, no matter what their age, from the very young to the increasingly older and perhaps even young adults, speaking as a mom. But more importantly, I think, what we're beginning to see is that while school often exists as a formal learning setting, the role of informal learning settings, which are critical in infant and toddler and early childhood development, really have a long history and of prioritizing the social emotional dimensions of learning. And we're seeing even both in formal preschool and early childhood settings, but more importantly in the community-based settings where learning happens, whether it be in libraries, in museums, in parks, particularly in programs that are geared for young children in which they participate with their families. They're beginning to see parents as the most critical educators of young people. And these learning settings are working to build the capacity of parents and families as educators to move this forward. And our hope is that the Commission can galvanize and capitalize on the great work that's already happening, geared for our youngest students, and move that into early childhood, early elementary, up through high school, and even into post-secondary, and so that we continue this focus on remaining keeping families central as educators, but thinking comprehensively about the learning environments and settings in which all young people grow and develop.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, this is Melissa. In many ways, we think those multiple learning settings that are geared toward our youngest learners really have intuitively understood the social and emotional aspects of learning alongside the academic aspects, and that understanding needs to extend to K-12, and we're hoping that the Commission can help with that. It's also, I think, there's a common misconception that it's most important in the early years, but just as your literacy, your understanding of literacy and mathematics and other subject areas grow and develop throughout your trajectory as a student, the same really holds true with social and emotional skills. So, very young kids are learning how to express their feelings and name their feelings, and as you get older, you're learning how to manage your feelings in different settings and how to deal with conflict resolution, and so those skills are consistently scaffolded, and so we really need our learning settings throughout a child's life and trajectory to provide developmentally appropriate efforts to learn and grow these skills. So are there any other questions from the attendees about our work? Any thoughts on the actions that you could take or support in your own communities? We'd love to hear.
You can ask a question or make a comment in the chat box, or you can raise your hand icon. It's a quiet group. We did have another question that came in, but this is from one of our network partners who actually works in DC and came on for the first half hour. And she was especially interested in how an equity lens was considered and applied with the findings. And I think I'm going to extrapolate a little bit more from her question, given what I know about her body of work, but in particular, recognizing that what works in some contexts is not always the best approach in others. So how did you think about how to make the recommendations adaptable with an equity lens?
That's been a huge focus of the commission's work. And in fact, I would say just a couple of weeks ago, we met with the groups of equity-focused organizations and civil rights organizations to get their thoughts and feedback on the topic, on the recommendations. I think one thing that we've heard, and I'm going to invite Jen to jump in as well, is that different skills are valued in different cultures, and so we really need to be mindful of that as we think about building these schools within the education community. And we hosted a focus group with business leaders recently, and I was reading a blog that was an outgrowth of the focus group, and that's something that one of our business leaders really emphasized, that as she thinks about kind of business and the workplace on an international scale, just being mindful that the definition of collaboration and communication might look different in Sweden than it does compared to here in the US, as it does compared to Canada. And so her proposition was that perhaps one of the biggest skills that we need to develop in students is agility and flexibility, to be able to kind of work within different settings and with people of different cultures. And I think that's an important lesson that applies to learning settings in our students' lives as well. I think we also want to be sure that when we're focusing on approaches to building student social, emotional, and academic development, we're doing it in an equitable way so that the students with the most needs are not getting, are getting more of the support and high quality support, and it doesn't become yet another way that they're getting the short end of the stick. And so that's something we've also been really focused on. Jennifer, do you want to add?
No, and I think, one of the most interesting parts of the work, and you can see it in our parent call to action or family call to action, as well as the forthcoming recommendations of the commission, is that none of these recommendations are prescriptive. Rather, we create a set of guidelines or we talk about strategies which have worked in some communities, which might work in others. And so, what we've done is begin to offer here are the starting points, here are the entry points, but we recognize that this work is going to look and feel different in lots of other communities. And so, excuse me, building on the idea, Jeff, that the work that's happening in the early childhood space. I mean, as Melissa mentioned earlier, we've seen early childhood really prioritize the social, emotional, and academic skills. How do we move that into K-12? That could be a great starting point for a community here like Washington, D.C., which has prioritized access to early childhood for all students. But in other communities, they might want to start on the other end of the spectrum and really focus on what are the critical employability skills that our older youth need as we face an aging workforce and need for more incoming workers. And so for us, we see this as a continuum of entry points, and nothing is prescriptive. But what we have found through this process and working with all of our different advisory groups and our partners like Ascend and others is that there is true consensus around the priority of the development of a broader set of skills. Now, we don't have consensus on what to call them, but that's another conversation for another time. But we all agree that we don't just need to be proficient in reading, writing, and math, but that we have a broader set of skills around how do we interact with others, how do we communicate with others, how do we present well, and most importantly, how do we demonstrate empathy for other people's perspective? Again, we don't have consensus, but I think that we have a growing idea of where these skills are sitting and how we can pursue a variety of different strategies in a variety of different settings to capitalize on this moment in time.
Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, I think we'd definitely like to thank our parent panelists who talked about their family call to action on this call and how they're using it in their own communities, and who have been informing the Commission's work throughout its journey.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Bye, guys.
Thanks to all who joined. And again, we recorded the webinar, so we will be posting it on our website and sharing it with the Commission as well. And welcome your feedback and emails to us at Ascend or at the Commission after this. And we can post a point of contact at both the Commission and at Ascend when we post the webinar. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.